Hi folks, in this assignment we're going to be building a little bookshop. So you have a little login page here, and you can click it, you can put in username and password, and if you don't put in the right username and password, it has to be Joe Sesame, it'll put incorrect. But now if we log in with Joe Sesame, it logs you into this selection page where you can select different books. So let's select Mary Shelley and say, let's get rid of Karl Marx and put in John Stuart Mill. Now if we look at the shopping cart, we can see that Mary Shelley and John Stuart Mill are here. We could go back to the shopping part and cart and change that. So maybe just put in John Stuart Mill, go back to the shopping cart, and then log out. Takes us back to the login page. Now, this is actually a fairly sophisticated project. I mean, it's a simple site, but it's got a fair amount of sophisticated frameworks behind it, and you'll be exposed to it in a future course when you do some more heavy-duty programming on the back end. Because to make this work, we actually have a server working as well as a database working. And in this project, I'm going to give you that server already as well as the database. And all you're going to be doing is coding the front end. And what's involved in coding the front end is working in a JavaScript file to build some JavaScript that allows little pieces of data to be requested from the server, and then sent back to the client. And when they sent back to the client, you then use those little pieces of data that are sent by the server to display them correctly in the web page. So we can actually see this at work when we are here on the login page. If we open up F12, or our tools, and we open up network, and we click login, notice that it actually, let's get rid of everything, let's click login again, and notice that there's a little request here that's sent to the server, and then all the server is doing is returning this little, it's called a JSON object, and I'll explain the notation to you in a second. It's returning a JSON object that looks a lot like just a JavaScript object. You can think of it as an attribute here, a username attribute, and a password attribute, as well as values. So here we typed in Joe with the wrong username, but the right password. The request was sent to the server, and then the server returned this little package of data with the username, which is indicating that that the username was incorrect, but the password was correct. And then you use JavaScript to actually display that in the page. And this is sort of pretty much what we're going to be doing in this entire application is using a framework called JSON and AJAX to make requests to the server that send little packets of data to the server and return little packets of data from the server back to the client, which you then use to rebuild or redisplay in the web page to change the web page a little bit. Now, to actually do this project, you're not going to be developing it in your own brackets editor. You're going to actually work with something like JSBin that's in the cloud, but that also gives you access to a server. And just like JSBin, I'm going to give you a project that you can then clone, and then based on that cloned project, put in appropriate extra code to build the bookshop. Okay, so let's first go to Glitch. Okay, and the project that you're trying to clone, let's get rid of this, it's called Stingy Lantern. Okay, so you can search for it here. And notice that I'm already logged in, so you first do need to create an account, and you can create it through GitHub. But so type in Stingy Lantern. And hopefully it comes up. And here's Stingy Lantern, a bookstore template. You can click it, and we don't want to show the finished website. We want to view the source. And now this is your this is kind of your editor, and you have an index HTML page here, as well as a client JS file. These are really the only files that you're going to be working in. Actually, client, this is the only one you're going to modify. Everything else has been made for you. So again, you have an index HTML page, which is where the login form is located. You have a select products page, which is where you select the actual books. And then you have a cart page where you can see the actual books that you selected. There's a CSS style sheet here, a client.js, which is what you're going to be working in to actually create the functions which allow you to communicate with the server. And then all of these other JavaScript files, the main one here, you don't have to worry about them, but they're effectively the server. And here's all the server code, which you'll learn about in a more advanced course, but I'm just trying to give you a peek at it. So every time you press a button, usually when you press a button on the client, it sends a request to the server processes that request using this main file plus all these other files, and then it sends messages back to the client, which are processed by client.js, and then processed by client.js to modify your pages on the client. So let's go back to that login page, and you can see we have the login form here. And the login form here actually calls a login method, which we need to then add to client.js here. So before you actually modify client.js, you actually have to clone the project. So this is Stingy Lantern here. To clone it, you use this remix to edit button here. And watch when I click remix to edit, it should change this URL. So remix to edit. And notice now I'm working in a new project called Sleet Meadowlark. Okay, so we do have now, again, we're going to create a login function. Yeah. And this is going to communicate with the server. And we actually have an API which tells us how to actually make that work. So if we go into our course modules and we go to interacting with the server API, and if we look at the use documented API, we can see this documentation for how to log in. And basically what we're doing here is we send to the server a little packet of data, a name and password pair, for example, name Joe Sesame, and then the server returns username correct or incorrect and password correct or incorrect, for example, like this. Okay, and then we can actually look at examples of this if we open up another glitch project here, and we see that documentation again expressed here. If we click the post login, it's showing us that the request was made to the server, and then username, it was saying username is correct and password was correct. If we look in on the network tab here and we make the request again, notice that login is made here. If we look at headers, and it's passing Joe and password to the server, and then the server returns a response, which shows up here as correct and correct. So if you actually want to see how this code is working in the background, you can look at it. Just view page source and look at client.js, and then look at the login function here, which is what's called when I click that login. And then what you have here is we're creating an object, and then we're adding attributes to that object, a name and a password. And then we're using this fetch method, which is a native method, a fairly new method that's been added to JavaScript in recent years. And we're specifying that we're going to make a request to the server. And so we specify the URL. In this case, it's just a relative URL to the login. I was going to say login page, but really what you're saying is you're just making a request to the server with log in the URL. And when the server sees that it's getting a request for login and it processes it in a certain way, you specify a post method. You don't need to worry about this stuff. You'll learn about it in an advanced course. You would just need to copy this. You're specifying the certain that you're sending it a certain way. Don't worry about it. Just copy this code. So you are posting the request to the server, and then the server then responds with this code here with its response. And so that's what you're seeing in that alert. So more abstractly, you're creating an object, and then you're converting it to a JSON, sort of stringify. You're turning it into a string, which is sent to the server, and then the server responds with to the request with a particular response. And again, if we this is the request, and this is the response. Okay. So again, if we click and we click here, this is the request, and the request has built the name password object and is sending Joe and Sesame as the values, and then the server responds with a different object with the username and password as attributes, and then these values as these values for paired with those attributes. So let's use that code, the API, to get the code. So here's our login method, and we can now stick that in our own cloned project in our client.js. Let's stick it up here. So now that we have the login copied and pasted in here from the API, we can see how things run. It's not going to do much, but we can then click the show button up here, and then we get the login page. And if we click login, now you can see that we're getting effectively things starting to work, because we click login, and we look at the network and can look at the headers. We can see that Joe, this JSON object is being passed. Joe passed Sesame, and then correct, and then this JSON response is being returned, and it's an alert. Of course, our task then is to modify the function so that instead of just sending a packaged object, the request of Joe and Sesame, it grabs these attributes from these fields and sends those values instead. And then when the response is returned, instead of just putting them in an alert, we show them right here. So actually so obviously this needs to be changed here. We can't create the object directly in the login function. We need to grab those attributes from the fields in the form. So here's the user the username field, and here's the password field. And then, of course, in addition, we don't want to just put up an alert. We want those. We don't just want the response to show up an alert. We want the response to be sent to actually be displayed in the actual login. And so we have the response here. Let's run it again and see what happens. So now if we have Joe Sesame and we click login, we're getting the alert and it's returning this username correct, and now they show up here. Or if we put, say, this and run it again, now we get incorrect, and this is the JSON objects that's returned from the server, but these values then populate here instead. Incorrect. So the last thing we needed to do, at least for the login page, is when the right username and password are sent over and the server returns correct, we then actually need to redirect the user to the not to this page, but to the page where they can actually select the books. Okay. So effectively, if there's been a successful login, we need to be able to take them from the index page to the select products page. And the way we can do that is by adding this little code here. And what this code is doing is it's looking to see whether the packet of data that was returned from the username specified that the username was correct and that the password was correct. If it was, then it displays a message saying, "Hello, Joe. Stand by while we log you in," and then runs this set timeout function, and then after the delay, the appropriate 3-second delay, it then redirects the user to this select products page. Okay, so we have a little error here, this red dot, and that's because we're calling, let's see if it tells us what it's doing. Message is not defined, so we're trying to call a method that we haven't actually created yet. So let's do that next. And I called it a method. It's really a function. But so if we call this function, this message function, what it does is it populates the message in the message field, and then after a certain amount of time, 3 seconds, it actually erases the message. So now let's try it again, and if we click login, we get correct, and see it populated this message field, and now it goes to the next page. So now, having built the login page and given you a sort of an overview of the API, which is this, as well as an introduction to Glitch and the editor, the Glitch, which is basically like a glorified JSBin, and then sort of very cursory overview of how to use JSON and AJAX to sort of exchange messages back and forth between a client and a server. The next challenge in this assignment is to create the shopping cart and the logout page. And depending on the semester, either you have to build this yourself, or I give you some more videos that guide you through the development of these other pages. Okay, good luck.